Guys, this is the last video lesson in this chapter. We have some other things that we haven't talked about yet, but we'll pick those up in class. So what we're talking about today is fermentation. Now, it's not usually called anaerobic cellular respiration, but that's basically what it is. So what happens when we don't have oxygen? So fermentation is cellular respiration in the absence of oxygen. So what happens if we don't have any oxygen? Now, for most of the time, we're talking about, so you'll notice over here, this little bubble says yeast. This bubble says anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic bacteria. When the Earth first cooled down, there wasn't any oxygen in the atmosphere, and everything that lived, if it was exposed to oxygen, oxygen was actually toxic. Some of those guys have hung around. We've got lots of anaerobic bacteria. They can't live in the presence of oxygen, or they just don't use oxygen. Well, so this isn't us, right? Well, actually, yeah, we can undergo this. So we're going to put in number 1. Let's put in number 2. Some eukaryotes. Because you guys know, let's put some. If you've been sprinting, after a while you start gasping for breath. Your body's trying to get enough oxygen. You can't do your cellular respiration fast enough, and so you have to be able to have a secondary pathway. So for some organisms like yeast and anaerobic bacteria, this is all they do. For us, this is an alternative. So this is like an alternative pathway. It's like our backup plan. And there's 2 kinds of fermentation. So we have alcoholic fermentation. And the example for this is yeast. So everything that we have that uses yeast does alcoholic fermentation, and that's what you see over here. We have lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation, and that's going to be most of the bacteria or some bacteria. One of them, for example, is called lactobacillus. Lactic acid bacteria, that's a category. And eukaryotic, it's our eukaryotic backup plan. So most eukaryotes, a lot of eukaryotes, especially animals, so we should do this /animal. It's our backup plan. So how does this work? You'll notice if you look at our diagram, we have a top part and we have a bottom part. So the first part of really, all we do is glycolysis. So both of these, whether we're talking about alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation, the first thing that happens is glycolysis. And if you remember, we make 2 ATP off of that. 2 ATP from 1 glucose. Well, most of our glucose gets made during aerobic, with the oxygen. So we make the other 34. If you think of a glucose molecule as being worth 40 bucks or ish, rounding. If I put $40 into a change machine at Chuck E. Cheese and I got back $2 bills, I'd be pretty ticked because I just lost all that energy. But fermentation does that. We take a whole glucose molecule and we make 2 ATP. Well, what a waste. Well, I'll tell you what, if you're running out of ATP, If you're sprinting and your brain needs ATP and it needs it like that, it's better to have two than to have none. So we'll actually have money to burn. We'll have energy to burn. But we've got all of this crap that's left over. You can't just let that float around. Eventually, that'll build up. So the you can do this glycolysis for so long, but then the waste products, in a sense, build up. And if our body can't get rid of them, glycolysis will stop. Or if the bacteria can't get rid of it, glycolysis will stop. And so what it does is, in yeast, it will take the byproducts and it'll combine them with alcohol. So this is the second part. This is actually the fermentation. So yeast combine with alcohol and they produce at the end, so their end product is ethanol or alcohol. There's lots of alcohols, by the way. Ethanol is what we think of. Ethanol is in all of our alcoholic beverages. So yeast, they do glycolysis. Then they put the leftovers with these alcohol molecules and they produce ethanol. So we're talking about beer, wine, liquor, vodka, you name it. Over here, the anaerobic bacteria and some, especially animal eukaryotes, they'll take the leftovers and they'll put it with this lactic acid, and their end product is lactic acid. Well, if you're a bacteria, so we get two different end results. For the bacteria, we can use that lactic acid to make yogurt, to make cheese, to make, oh gosh, what are some of the other foods? Fermented foods like sauerkraut. But these are the two that we talk about most often. And humans can exploit that because we like to drink alcoholic beverages and we like to eat yogurt and cheese. But eukaryotes / animals store the lactic acid. We store it in our muscles until we can get rid of it. We have to flush it out of our body. That's why if you put yourself in a position where you are out of breath, so you start track season and you run sprints, or you start basketball and you're all practice long, you're doing lactic acid fermentation because your mitochondria are not up to snuff yet. They're not processing enough ATP. And so you build this up and you build it up, you stick it in your muscles, and the next day you get out of bed and you go, oh my gosh, I can't move. Oh my gosh, this hurts so bad, because you've got this stuck in your muscles and your body has to flush it out. Now, the good news is over time, you'll produce more mitochondria so that you can make more ATP more quickly. It's called training. We train our bodies. But until you get up to speed, you have to do this lactic acid fermentation. All right, so what are our takeaways here? Anaerobic cellular respiration is good. Some organisms like yeast and bacteria use it to live all the time. We use it as kind of our backup plan. The ATP actually come from taking a glucose molecule and we do glycolysis. We split it into our pyruvates and we get 2 ATP, and then we throw away the rest of the carbon. What a waste, or the rest of the glucose. What a waste, but at least it keeps us running. But we have to do something with the leftovers. A yeast will combine it and turn it into alcohol. Bacteria and animals will turn it into lactic acid. But we can use that to our advantage. We can make champagne and wine. With the bacteria, the lactobacillus, we can make our yogurt and cheese. But for us, we got to stick it in our muscles. So we don't want to have to do this all that often because we end up being really sore. Okay, that is fermentation. And thanks for watching.